It may be the highest duty of a judge at any given moment to disregard not merely the wishes of individuals of great political or financial power, but the overwhelming tide of public sentiment. And the judge who does thus disregard public sentiment when it is wrong, who brushes aside the plea of any special interest when the pleading is not rounded on righteousness, performs the highest service to the country. Such a judge is deserving of all honor. And all honor cannot be paid to this wise and fearless judge if we permit the growth of an absurd convention which would forbid any criticism of the judge of another type, who shows himself timid in the presence of arrogant disorder, or who on insufficient grounds grants an injunction that does grave injustice, or who, in his capacity as a construer, and therefore in part a maker of the law, in flagrant fashion thwarts the cause of decent government. The best judges have ever been foremost to disclaim any immunity from criticism. This has been true since the days of the great English Lord Chancellor Parker, who said, "Let all people be at liberty to know what I found my judgment upon. So when I've given it in any cause, others may be at liberty to judge of me." This is set forth with singular clearness and good temper by Judge W.H. Taft, when a United States Circuit Judge 11 years ago in 1895, "The opportunity freely and publicly to criticize judicial action is of vastly more importance to the body politic than the immunity of courts and judges from unjust aspersions and attack. Nothing tends more to render judges careful in their decisions and anxiously solicitous to do exact justice than the consciousness that every act of theirs is to be subjected to the intelligent scrutiny and candid criticism of their fellow men. Courts must ultimately rest their defense upon the inherent strength of the opinions they deliver as the ground for their conclusions, and must trust to the calm and deliberate judgment of all the people as their best vindication. There is one consideration which should be taken into account by good people who carry a sound proposition to an excess in objecting to any criticism of a judge's decision. The instinct of the American people is sound in this matter. They will not subscribe to the doctrine that any public servant is to be above all criticism. The man who debauches others in order to obtain a high office stands on an equality of corruption with the man who debauches others for financial profit. And when hatred is sown, the crop which rises up can only be evil. The plain people who think that mechanics, farmers, merchants, workers with head or hand, the men to whom American traditions are dear, who love this country and try to act decently by their neighbors, owe it to themselves to remember that the most damaging blow that can be given popular government is to elect an unworthy and sinister agitator on a platform of violence and hypocrisy. Whenever such an issue is raised in this country, nothing can be gained from flinching from it. For in such a case, democracy itself is on trial. Popular self-government under Republican forms is itself on trial. The triumph of the mob is just as evil a thing as the triumph of the plutocracy. And to have escaped one danger avails nothing if we succumb to the other. In the end, the honest man, whether rich or poor, who earns his own living and tries to deal justly by his fellows, has as much to fear from the insincere and unworthy demagogue, promising much and performing nothing, or else performing nothing but evil, who would set the mob to plunder the rich, as from the crafty corruptionist, who for his own ends would permit the common people to be exploited by the very wealthy. If we ever let this government fall into the hands of men of either of these two classes, we shall show ourselves false to America's past. It is a mistake, and it betrays a spirit of foolish cynicism to maintain that all international governmental action is and must ever be based upon mere selfishness, and that to advance ethical reasons for such actions is always a sign of hypocrisy. This is no more necessarily true of the action of governments than of the actions of individuals. It is a sure sign of a base nature, always to ascribe base motives for the actions of others. Unquestionably, no nation can afford to disregard proper considerations of self-interest, any more than a private individual can do so. But it is equally true that the average private individual in any really decent community does many actions with reference to other men in which he is guided not by self-interest, but by public spirit, by regard for the rights of others, by a disinterested purpose to do good to others and raise the tone of the community as a whole. Similarly, a really great nation must often act, and as a matter of fact, often does act, toward other nations in a spirit not in the least of mere self-interest, but paying heed chiefly to ethical reasons. And as the centuries go by, this disinterestedness in international action, this tendency of the individuals comprising the nation to require that nation to act with justice towards its neighbors, steadily grows and strengthens. It is neither wise nor right for a nation to disregard its own needs, and it is foolish and may be wicked to think that other nations will disregard theirs. But it is wicked for a nation only to regard its own interest, and foolish to believe that such is the sole motive that actuates any other nation. It should be our steady aim to raise the ethical standard of national action, just as we strive to raise the ethical standard of individual action. Not only must we treat all nations fairly, but we must treat with justice and goodwill all immigrants who come here under the law, whether they are Catholic or Protestant, Jew or Gentile, whether they come from England or Germany, Russia, Japan or Italy, matters nothing. All we have a right to question is the man's conduct. If he is honest and upright in his dealings with his neighbor and with the state, then he is entitled to respect and good treatment. Especially do we need to remember our duty to the stranger within our gates. It is a sure sign of a low civilization, a low morality, to abuse or discriminate against or in any way humiliate such stranger who has come here lawfully and who is conducting himself properly. To remember this is incumbent on every American citizen, and it is, of course, peculiarly incumbent on every government official, whether of the nation or of the several states. I am prompted to say this by the attitude of hostility here and there assumed toward the Japanese in this country. This hostility is sporadic and is limited to a very few places. Nevertheless, it is most discreditable to us as a people, and it may be fraught with the gravest consequences to the nation. The friendship between the United States and Japan has been continuous since a time, over a half century ago, when Commodore Perry, by his expedition to Japan, first opened the islands to Western civilization. Since then, the growth of Japan has been literally astounding. The overwhelming mass of our people cherish a lively regard and respect for the people of Japan. And in almost every quarter of the Union, the stranger from Japan is treated as he deserves. But here and there, a most unworthy feeling has been manifested itself toward the Japanese. The feeling that has been shown in shutting them out from the common schools in San Francisco and in mutterings against them in one or two other places because of their efficiency as workers. To shut them out from the public schools is a wicked absurdity. And when there are no first-class colleges in the land, including the universities and colleges of California, which do not gladly welcome Japanese students, and on which Japanese students do not reflect credit, we have as much to learn from Japan as Japan has to learn from us. And no nation is fit to teach unless it is also willing to learn. Throughout Japan, Americans are well treated, and any failure on the part of Americans at home to treat the Japanese with a like courtesy and consideration is by just so much a confession of inferiority in our civilization. I recommend to the Congress that an act be passed specifically providing for the naturalization of Japanese who come here intending to become American citizens. One of the great embarrassments attending the performance of our international obligations is the fact that the statutes of the United States are entirely inadequate. They fail to give the national government sufficiently ample power through the United States courts and by the use of the Army and the Navy to protect aliens and the right secured to them under solemn treaties which are the law of the land. I therefore earnestly recommend that the criminal and civil statutes of the United States be so amended and added to as to enable the President, acting for the United States government, which is responsible in our international relations, to enforce the rights of aliens under treaties. Even as the law now is, something can be done by the federal government towards this end. And in the matter now before me affecting the Japanese, everything that is in my power to do will be done. And all of the forces, military and civil, of the United States, which I may lawfully employ, will be so employed. Good manners should be an international, no less an individual attribute. I ask for fair treatment of the Japanese, as I would ask for fair treatment for Germans, or Englishmen, Frenchmen, Russians, or Italians. I ask it as due to humanity and civilization. I ask it due to ourselves because we must act uprightly toward all men. Thank you.